According to the story in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 to 9, the people of the world all originally speak one united language. However, the Babylonians wanted to make a name for themselves and tried to build a tower that would reach the heavens. God, obviously dissatisfied with this, confused the language of the workers so they couldn't understand each other. Thus, construction stopped and people dispersed. Judaic and Christian analysis names this original unified language as an Adamic language, spoken in the earliest days of humans and for the first man, Adam. But is there empirical proof for the origins of language? People weren't too bothered about finding that out until a great number of centuries later. Answering where a language comes from has driven the work of linguists, particularly in an attempt to find similarities in order to group languages together. How did he link together the languages of two seemingly distant and very different civilizations? He initiated what would be known as the comparative method. This method basically compares words from different languages, finding similarities usually in meaning, and establishing a relationship between them. As an example, compare good morning in English and guten Morgen in German. Besides meaning the same thing and being a typical daily greeting, each of the two words making up the phrases are very similar, and in fact derives from the same words of the common ancestor of the two languages. Words that are related in origin are called cognates. For English and German, not only can we find other words that correspond to each other by meaning, we can also find how their sentence structures are similar, and thus, with confidence, put them under the Germanic language family. Linguists can reconstruct proto-languages using the comparative method by guessing what the word that turned into the corresponding word and the descendant language sounds like, based upon a set of cognates and knowledge of what sound changes historically took place. Of course, you shouldn't mistake words with similar sounds and definitions as cognates. Even if two words are seemingly similar, they may be false cognates, as seen in English dung and Korean tong. Despite both meaning feces, they come from different origins. Chinese tian and Mongol tengri both mean sky, and both are religiously significant to their cultures, so it's easy to mistake that this has a common origin, and thus the Chinese and Mongols once shared a belief system. But, in reality, they are also false cognates, as the Chinese word was initially pronounced with a la-like sound, as opposed to the Mongol word, and its descendants that are pronounced close to hen. Another example would be the Sun language theory, proposed by Turkish nationalists in the 1920s, which claimed that all languages were derived from a Turkic one, by comparing English words to vaguely similar Turkic ones, such as God, tıkıt, or blessing. From any linguist's view, this was patently absurd. While the Sun language theory was not really a serious linguistic pursuit, as much as it was part of Turkey asserting its cultural independence, since many loanwords from Persian and Arabic in the language could not be removed, while English-derived words could not be translated. False cognates are a pretty common error in the comparative linguistics. Another problem is that of the loanword, words in one language borrowed from another, which due to the interactions between languages can be confused enough to not be easily recognized. For instance, there are currently over 4,000 loanwords of the Spanish language loaned from Arabic, due to Muslim rule of Spain. Most of the words that begin with al in Spanish is most likely borrowed from Arabic. An example will be the word for oil in Spanish, aceituna, which is loaned from zait zaytun, the equivalent in Arabic. Linguists also have to guess how a language sounded like in the past and what changes it has undergone. By comparing how the same language was spoken in different periods of time, or by comparing with a known ancestor, linguists can construct sound changes which can explain how a word sounds evolved into its current state. The process of comparing the same language is known as internal reconstruction. For example, by comparing how syllables in Japanese poetry were written in the 8th century with how those words are spoken today, we are able to get a view of how Japanese was spoken at an earlier time, and what sound changes occurred on its way to modern Japanese. This method and the comparative method are used hand in hand to provide us with a picture of the evolution and relationship between different languages. Linguists have been able to classify large amounts of seemingly distant languages into groups such as Indo-European, Uto-Aztecan, Afro-Asiatic, and Niger-Congo. The successes in these fields have further aided us in other anthropological studies, such as the spread of cultures of the late Neolithic period and how the populations that speak those languages today formed. However, while we can find the origins of many languages, can we find the single origin of every language? The methods of linguistics eventually encounter limitations when the language in question is too old. Due to lack of written record, the sheer amount of possibilities of changes that can occur is unknown, and people may essentially be working off reconstructions of reconstructions, which could be unreliable. Linguistics relating to older time periods are already beset with uncertainty and controversy, and records do not extend much beyond 18,000 years ago, and human language is certainly far older than that. Adding to the long list of problems is the question of how language itself comes about. One dispute is monogenesis versus polygenesis, which is the theory of language either being developed once then spreading, or being developed multiple times. Another point of doubt is how exactly did humans distinguish their language from the sounds made by other animals. Some attempts at describing early language use speculation based on the structure of human throats and other organs of speech, while others compare words from a large variety of languages and even proto-languages to try to find some pattern. However, they aren't exactly most reliable and have been criticized for many reasons. Is it possible to truly know about or even of the languages that all others come from? Maybe, maybe not. But we should try to continue to find the answer to that question. Perhaps the value of searching for the origin of language may not be the end goal itself, but rather the accomplishments, the discoveries, and feats made along the way.